I first learned about Dr. Wu Liantei from my Chinese textbook in secondary 4. As that was 40 years ago, you should forgive me for not remembering too much. However, I do remember that he was a hero in the war against a deadly plague. Then the other day, just before our libraries shut down during this circuit breaker period, I saw a book and decided to borrow it. Now we are in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think it would be most appropriate for me to share this book with you. All right, let's take a look inside the book. I shall not go into detail on every single page, but I will focus on certain items at my own discretion. And first of all, a few messages from dignitaries, prefaced by the author. And this message, I think, sums up what Dr. Wu's philosophy is. For although much has been accomplished, still more has to be done. And I'm always on the lookout for colleagues who do not mind hard tasks, long hours, a simple life, and severe training. For I verily believe that China, with a many thousand-year-old civilization, industrious peasants, and brilliant thinkers and artistic scholars, as well as inherent democratic spirit, can easily get into line with modern nations. But in order to achieve the quickest and most permanent results in the most economical way, her leaders should absorb the best that the West can offer, such as seriousness of purpose, service to others as well as self, a scientific temperament, rigid scrupulousness in management of business undertakings, attention to detail, and a willingness to learn from outsiders even at the height of success. On the other hand, they should eschew the weaker points of Western civilization, such as undue worship of material success at the expense of the soul, overindulgence in the ordinary comforts of life and luxuries, and lack of discipline in the family. Very thought-provoking pre-1949 words, I'm sure you agree. All right, let's go on to part one, which deals with his parentage, his early education, and so on. His parents, his father is from Guangdong province. His mother is a local Chinese woman. He was born on the 10th of March 1879 in Penang, Malaya. So that's Penang Free School, which dates back to 1816. And after that, he won a Queen's Scholarship to do medicine at Cambridge University. So that's Cambridge University, and this is his class list. Can you spot his name? I'm sure you can't, because he used the Hokkien name Go Lien Tak. And over here they put Tak in front. Tak Go Lien. Okay, after graduating from Cambridge, he went on to do research in pathology and bacteriology. These are some of his mentors. Alright, after spending 7 years in Europe, Dr. Wu finally completed his research and his postgraduate studies. And over here, his colleagues have organized a farewell dinner for him in 1903. This is the menu. I'm not sure why they didn't include the food. And here's the list of postgraduate students. You can find his name here, Go Lin Tak. I'm not sure why they couldn't standardize the spelling for his name. And this is a picture he took with his family after his return to Penang. You can see his father, his mother, his siblings, and you would notice that Dr. Wu is the only one who didn't wear the queue or the pigtail. Alright, this is a photo of 3 Queen scholars together. This is our very own Dr. Lim Boon Keng. Boon Keng wrote his name after him. This is Dr. Wu. Dr. Lim actually initiated Dr. Wu into social reform work. They started a magazine, they promoted the arts and Chinese culture together. Finally, in 1905, Dr. Wu got married. This is Dr. Lim Woon King, and his wife is a sister-in-law of Dr. Lim. This is Dr. Wu here, and this man over here is his father-in-law. He's Mr. Huang from Fuzhou. He's responsible for starting a settlement of Fuzhou residents, migrants in Sarawak. So the bride's name is Miss Huang Su Qiong. These are pictures taken from Dr. Wu's home in Penang. He was thinking of settling down, starting his own practice. He could have been just an ordinary doctor in Penang, but then there was a twist in the plot. Dr. Wu ran his own private practice at Chulia Street in Penang from 1904 to 1907. Now, apart from running his clinic, he was also involved in an anti-opium campaign. That earned him the undesirable attention of gangs and lucrative businesses with connections with the authorities. Dr. Wu's clinic was raided, and an ounce of opium was found in his possession. Overnight, he turned from an anti-opium crusader to a convicted criminal. The incident dealt a huge blow to his reputation. But things happened for a reason. News of his conviction spread far and wide. Well, if Malaya doesn't want him, we want him. Dr. Wu received a letter from China's Grand Counselor Yuan Shikai, inviting him to take the position of Vice Director of the Imperial Army Medical College in Tianjin, China. Dr. Wu's acceptance of Yuan Shikai's offer would have a profound effect not only on his career, but on the history of modern medicine in China. It couldn't have been a worse time to arrive in China. There were major political upheavals. Emperor Guangxu had died after years under house arrest, and Yuan Shikai has been banished. But then something else happened. December 1910, plague broke out in Manchuria. Dr. Wu was tasked to manage the epidemic. He found the condition in Harbin to be horribly unsatisfactory. The official in charge was an unqualified Chinese physician who knew nothing about germs. There was just one isolation center where he would just dump anyone with plague symptoms. Seeing the dismal situation in Harbin, he knew that some drastic measures were necessary. Dr. Wu wrote, "However, thanks to the local support I received from Peking and to the increasing number of assistants, including some missionary doctors, we were able to turn schools, theatres and bathhouses into disinfection stations, and temples and deserted inns into isolation wards and plague hospitals." Dr. Wu suspected that it was pneumonic plague, but he needed to perform post-mortems and autopsies to confirm that. The trouble is, cutting up dead bodies was taboo in China during that time. Fortunately, Dr. Wu had a Japanese victim of the disease to work on. Once Dr. Wu had established that it was pneumonic plague, he hospitalized symptomatic patients, disinfected their homes, and isolated their contacts. He also deployed soldiers to curtail movement, and he designed a face mask for all medical staff. So Dr. Wu wrote, "It took nearly a month for the organization to be perfected and for the officials to come round to my point of view. The plague reached its highest point of virulence in January 1911, when as many as 180 persons died in one day. The mortality rate at the time for this pneumonic plague was 100%. Now, owing to the frozen state of the ground and the difficulty of digging trenches, the number of coffins piled up quickly, and by the end of January, nearly 4,000 were counted on the burial ground. I took the bull by the horns and boldly wired to Peking, asking for permission to burn all these coffins. After a delay of 2 days, the final order was received for the cremation of the dead." This picture shows that Dr. Wu also had help from the Russians, and some of the train wagons have been converted into isolation centers. And this was the defining moment in the war against the plague. On 31st January, 2,000 coffins were piled up in columns of 100 each, and in spite of the cold, snow and wind, burned splendidly. By 3rd February, not one coffin remained on the ground, which but a few days ago had witnessed more than half a mile of dead. Our staff now felt less unnerved, worked with greater zeal and hope, and the epidemic was firmly controlled. The last case of plague was reported in the Chinese city on 1st of March 1911. Here's a picture of Dr. Wu working in his lab in Harbin. He stressed the importance of modernizing the practice of medicine in China. And in 1911, it was a proud moment for China when the country, for the first time in history, hosted an international medical conference held in Mukden, which is present-day Shenyang. Here's a picture of the delegates from the 11 countries who took part in that conference. Later that year, Dr. Wu received his honors from the emperor himself, and Chinese officials gave him this piece of calligraphy, 名震环球. Dr. Wu's work was far from complete. He did his research on the Manchurian plague in a joint expedition with Russian researchers. They found a reservoir for the plague bacteria in the Mongolian marmot. Because of a new dyeing technique, the fur of the animal could be passed off as mink. So the huge demand triggered off a flood of inexperienced hunters from other provinces. And while the traditional hunters targeted only the healthy animals running on the grassland, the emigrant hunters went for sick animals hiding in their burrows. So this disease was thus passed on to humans. That's Dr. Wu and his research team, and as you can see, they perform their experiments and their studies in the open. And next, he embarked on a hospital construction spree. This is a new Harbin hospital. All designed to Western standards, yeah. Very modern. And then he also built hospitals in other places in Manchuria, the northeast. It's amazing. And after that, he founded the National Medical Association. These are the members. And he even completed the Peking Central Hospital in 1918. Another epidemic hit Manchuria in 1919, and that's the cholera epidemic. With Dr. Wu in charge, the fatality rate was only 14.01%. Then there was a second pneumonic plague epidemic in 1920. And this time, even though the population in Manchuria has grown considerably, only 8,500 people died in this epidemic, as compared to the first pneumonic plague epidemic, where 60,000 people had died. So with the facilities and the experience, they managed to control the disease much more effectively. And here's a picture of some of the improvised masks which Dr. Wu designed. I guess you can call this a PPE, the PPE during that time. So we can see the widespread use of masks in China back then. And train wagons here being converted into isolation centers. They didn't work alone, they had many helpers from Russia as well. That's one thing that we should note. And these are the suspected cases to be isolated. Pretty much quite similar to what we're doing today. So these are the dead bodies to be cremated. They examine their postal workers, make sure they are disease-free before they allow them to go out to work. And this is the place where they cremate the bodies. Right, that's Dr. Wu with his Western associate working in the Harbin laboratory. That's him performing an autopsy. So Dr. Wu published numerous research papers on the marmot. They conducted meticulous studies on the animal and how they contract the pneumonic plague. Very unfamiliar to Chinese doctors during that time. Here conducting plague experiments in an open field. Again, laboratory work. Alright, two posters designed by Dr. Wu himself. The first one is bubonic plague, 腺疫症, and the other one is pneumonic plague, 肺疫症. And this is the Peking Union Medical College and Hospital, opened in 1921. In 1924, the completion of the Northeastern Hospital at Mukden. Mukden again is Shenyang today. Dr. Wu published a paper on pneumonic plague. This is published in the League of Nations Health Organization. The League of Nations was formed after the First World War. After the Second World War was the United Nations. So this is like the precursor of our WHO. So this is another feather in the cap for Dr. Wu. Directorship in the National Quarantine Service from 1930. Now, in order for quarantine to be effective, of course, you must control imported cases. That's when they have to work closely with major ports. This is a picture of Shanghai Quarantine Hospital. And this is a picture of Wuhan Quarantine Hospital. This is Xiamen Quarantine Station at the harbor. And Dr. Wu traveled extensively all the way down to Hainan Island as well, where I met up with colleagues over there. And this is an aerial view of Nanjing Central Hospital. Dr. Wu also wrote a book on the history of Chinese medicine. He's not a fan of TCM, but then he respected this traditional healing art. So he represented China in numerous international medical conferences, lists of honors and awards. Alright, finally, something about his family life. Those are two of his sons. He actually had a third son who died when he was only 6 months old. So his two sons grew up to be doctors as well. The elder son died of TB. The younger son died of pneumonia. So both of them died before him. His two sons with his wife there. And these are pictures of the first Mrs. Wu, Madam Huang Shuqiong. Madam Huang lives in Beijing, and this is his elder son getting married. The office for the National Quarantine Service is actually in Shanghai, and that's where Dr. Wu had his second family. He married Madam Li Shuzhen in 1925. They met in Harbin, and she's not a native of Harbin. She actually migrated there from Guangdong. Dr. Wu had 5 children with his second wife, and this is the eldest daughter, Wu Yuling. She's the author of this book. And some pictures of Dr. Wu with his second family in Shanghai, and also with some friends from the West. And seated here on the swing is the second Mrs. Wu, the children, and this is their maid. This is his son, Wu Changsheng, currently residing in Australia. their home in Shanghai. Dr. Wu visited Penang again in 1936, and this is a picture he took with his sisters. Again with his old friend Dr. Lim Boon Keng of Singapore. A picture taken with friends and relatives in Shanghai, 1936. And that's towards the end of his stay in China. So 1937, when China was invaded by Japan, Dr. Wu had to come to a very difficult decision, whether to work for the Japanese government or to retreat all the way to Chongqing and work for the very unstable government over there. He decided to leave and go back to Penang. This is a picture of them taken just before their departure on that vessel there. By this time, the first Mrs. Wu had passed away. So upon his return to Malaya, Dr. Wu started a private practice in Ipoh. Lasted from 1938 to 1959. After that, he returned to Penang. He visited China again in 1947. That's his picture taken over there at that time. That's Dr. Wu here with his 5 children by the second Mrs. Wu. More family photos, trip to Japan and other stuff. So all his community service in Malaya. And his autobiography. Unfortunately, this book is now out of print. See all the newspaper cuttings. Then finally, Dr. Wu returned to Penang in 1960, where he passed away after suffering from a stroke. So that's his funeral procession. And that's about it. So that is the life and the work of the legendary Dr. Wu Lien-teh, the plague fighter. I hope you have learned as much from the book as I did, and it certainly helped to remind me of some of the things I learned in Chinese class 40 years ago. Thank you for watching.